allow for apartment buildings to be located in our activity centres. But in our residential areas, we will ensure new housing respects the established height, heritage and character of our suburbs. We have expanded our team of officers to ensure new development delivers on important features like landscaping, privacy and environmental benefits. Moreland is changing and needs a diverse range of housing. Because we're a diverse community, some of us rent, some of us own. We have single people living in houses and families living in apartments. Into the future, we know we will need more smaller homes to cater for increasing numbers of small households. We need to cater for a range of people living in a range of different housing options. It's more than just housing we're planning for, it's the infrastructure that supports it. 5,000 new street trees every year, sustainable environmental practices, green open space and better shopping strips. We're also working to make it easier for you to find out information and let us know your views on new development. Moreland is our home, one community, proudly diverse. Victoria's population is growing, and Moreland is growing too. It's estimated that the Melbourne area will grow from 5 to 8 million people in the next few decades. They need to live somewhere. Some will choose to live here in Moreland. It's a great place to live. Moreland Council knows the challenges and opportunities that this increase in population brings. With 43,000 more people living here by 2036, there are important things to consider, plan for and act on. Things like housing, transport, our open spaces and managing the impacts of construction activity. 43,000 new people, or around 18,000 new households, means taller buildings or more buildings on existing blocks. This is not what many of us are used to, but lifestyles are changing and we need to adapt. We want to encourage these taller buildings to be located near public transport routes and where daily needs like shopping and community services are just a walk away. This way, more people won't mean lots more traffic and congestion. More flexible use of our industrial land can help too. Some land can change to accommodate new work and local jobs, and some can provide housing for more people. We are also looking at ways that some housing can remain more affordable. Council is actively buying property to improve and purchase new parks and open spaces for all residents to enjoy. This is about thoughtful planning for a great future for everyone. The things we love, the vibrant and thriving shopping areas, our great heritage areas will still be here. But changes need to happen. We want to make sure that any development is of high quality and improves livability. So we're making decisions based on research, data, world's best practice and consultation with the community. Together, we can continue to make Moreland a great place to live for our long-term residents, our new arrivals and for those who'd like to live here in the future. Moreland, one community, proudly diverse.
İsmim Cemal Akdeniz. Avustralya'ya 1974 yılında geldim ve ilk yerleştiğim bölgelerden bir tanesi Brunswick. Moreland bölgesi Türklerin yoğun olarak oturmuş olduğu bir bölgeydi. Bu bölgeye yerleşmemize neden oldu. Tabii ki ilk geldiğimizde dil bilmiyoruz. Bu nedenle dilimizi konuşan insanlarla beraber olmaktan daha doğal bir şey yoktu. O nedenle buraya geldik. Moreland bölgesinde ilk banka memurları.
Good evening, councillors, members of the gallery and to our viewers live streaming tonight's meeting. My name is Councillor Natalie Abboud and I'm the Mayor of the Moreland City Council and the Chairperson of tonight's council meeting. It's my pleasure to welcome you this evening. Our meeting is being held on the traditional country of the Wurundjeri Woiwurrung people and I wish to acknowledge them as the traditional owners. I would also like to pay my respects to their elders, past, present and emerging, and the elders from other communities who may be here with us today. I acknowledge that currently many Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people call Moreland home. I also acknowledge the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people never ceded sovereignty of their lands and have continuously cared for their country for over 60,000 years as the world's oldest living culture. Members of the gallery, please note that this council meeting is being recorded and web streamed live to council's website and Facebook. This recording will also be available as video on demand. Gallery attendees are advised that they will be recorded during the meeting. Councillors, as a reminder that in line with the adopted councillor conduct principles as outlined in the Councillor Code of Conduct, councillors should ensure that they conduct themselves in the meeting with integrity, impartially exercise their responsibilities in the interest of the local community, and not improperly seek to confer or advantage any person. This behaviour will support principles for leadership and good governance that secures public confidence in the office of councillor. Members of the gallery, in the event of an emergency or disruption, we may be required to take action to ensure the safety of attendees. Please follow the directions issued by council staff and security officers. Thank you for your understanding and cooperation. I'd like to introduce the other councillors in attendance tonight. Councillor Sue Bolton, Councillor Anna-Olivia Carley-Hannon, Councillor Helen Davidson.
Hi.
The Deputy Mayor, Councillor Mark Riley, Councillor Alia Farnley.
Hi.
Councillor John Kavanagh.
Good evening.
Councillor Dale Martin.
Hi.
Councillor Lambros Tapanos.
Good evening.
And Councillor Oscar Yildiz JP. It happens at every meeting to all of us at one time or another. The officers in attendance tonight are the Acting Chief Executive Officer to my left, Grant Thorne, the Acting Director of City Infrastructure, Greg Gale, the Director of City Futures, Kirsten Coster, the Director of Community Development, Arden Joseph, the Director of Engagement and Partnerships, Joseph Tabacco, the Director of Business Transformation, Sue Vucevic, the Unit Manager of Governance, Sally Curran, the Manager of Corporate Governance, Jodie Watson, and the Executive Manager of Finance, Liz Rowland. Councillors, I note that Councillor Dorney is on leave of absence from the 15th of September to the 24th of October 2019, and as the rest of us are here, there'll be no other apologies. Councillors, are there any interests or conflicts of interest to declare? Thank you. I'll now ask for a motion for the confirmation of the minutes of the council meeting held on the 23rd of September 2019 and the special council meeting held on the 3rd of October 2019. Thank you, Councillor Riley. And a seconder, please. Councillor Kavanagh, thank you. Is there any debate on this item? All those in favour? I declare that carried. So, councillors, now that we've confirmed the minutes and as we do not have any special committees, we'll move on to petitions. And we have received a petition which is called PET 1319, titled Ban Single-Use Plastic Bottles. So I have a copy of that here. Can I have a mover for the petition to be received? Councillor Riley, and a seconder, Councillor Martin. Councillor Riley, would you like to speak?
I'm very excited that we've got something to this effect, given it really lines up with our policies, but also because I think the age of these people in our community is a great sign of things to come.
Councillor Martin? No? I'll put that to the vote. All those in favour? Against? Declare that carried. Are there any, councillors, do you have petitions to be tabled on behalf of residents? Councillors, as there are no, are there any petitions to be tabled from the gallery though? No? As there's no further petitions to be tabled, I'll ask if any member of the gallery, I already did that bit, sorry, excuse me. Okay, we'll now move to public question time. This is an opportunity for 30 minutes for people to raise questions with councillors, and I would like to outline the process. Please note that if your question relates to a matter on any of the reports, this is the time to raise the question with us. Questions can also be submitted online prior to the meeting. A maximum of 2 questions is allowed per person, and questions that relate to a matter listed on the agenda will be dealt with first. Sorry, I just have to interrupt myself. Is that Fatima?
Yes.
Yes. We've just accepted the petition, but I wonder, would Fatima like to come and speak to her motivation for putting the petition? Because she's more than welcome to do so. Now is a good time.
Okay.
Does she feel like she'd like to do that?
Give it 5 minutes.
Come together.
You can come up together.
Yeah. Okay.
So just approach the podium here. And just to the microphone there, just back, the other side, so that you're facing me. Go behind it, go behind it. Yeah. Well done. Would you like to tell us a little bit about this petition? What motivated you?
Close your eyes then.
You can't do this the wrong way, okay? Anything that you say is the right thing to say, so you can't fail. So just say what you can feel in your heart, and we'll listen to you.
Stop climate change.
Yep. And do you know anything about the effects of the bottles, the single-use plastic bottles? Did you learn something at school, or was there something that...
Animals die and get...
Yep. Well, I'd like to tell you that all of us, I think I can speak on behalf of the whole council, because we've accepted the petition into the chamber that you've submitted, and I think I can speak for the whole council when I say that we're delighted that you've taken the initiative to bring this to our attention, and I'm sure that I speak for all of us when I say that we will do what we can do to ban the use of single-use plastic bottles, and also that the council itself has adopted a single-use plastic policy, which is called Plastic Wise, and we're endeavouring to not use plastic cups while we're here eating and drinking things in this building. And when we have events and parties, we wash everything. We don't use plastic as much as we can. There are some cardboard cups out there, but they're not plastic lined, they're fully recyclable. So everything that you're doing is helping, and we're also doing quite a lot as well. So thank you so much for your work and for collecting all of these names, and you can tell everybody who's signed this that we support them wholeheartedly, okay? Thank you, Fatima.
Thank you.
Well done. So, I'll just go back. I'm not quite sure where I got to, but a maximum of 2 questions is allowed per person, and questions that relate to a matter listed in the agenda will be dealt with first. When I invite you, you or your representative must ask the question without taking longer than 2 minutes. I'll ring a bell at 1 minute and 45 seconds, or make some kind of noise, or find a bell, which means that you have 15 seconds to complete your question. If you've submitted a second question, it may, at my discretion, be deferred until all other persons who've submitted questions have asked their first question, and or not be asked if the time allotted for public question time has expired. A maximum of 3 questions will be heard on any one subject, and we will proceed on to the next topic, and if time allows, return to the previous topic. Either myself or another councillor will answer your question, or I will ask the Chief Executive Officer to either provide a response or refer it to another council officer. As detailed in Meeting Procedure Local Law Section 3517, as chairperson I have the right to disallow certain questions if they are defamatory, indecent, abusive, offensive, irrelevant, trivial or objectionable in language or substance. If a response to your question is provided at tonight's meeting, there will be no further formal response. However, Council will action any commitments made in answering the question. Question time can only be extended for one 30-minute period, and only for the purpose of responding to questions that are related to matters listed on this evening's agenda. If your question cannot be answered, it will be taken on notice and responded to between now and the next council meeting and reported in the governance report. We have 30 minutes, and I want to make sure that we hear all of the questions, so I request that councillors who answer address each question succinctly, and the commencement time is 7:10. Okay, so John Englard, I have you at the top of the pile.
John Englard, convener of Climate Action Moreland. I'd like to first thank the Mayor and councillors for my award at the Moreland Awards for environmental sustainability, for my continued advocacy on climate action. My news is that I have been selected to go as an NGO observer to attend the United Nations Climate Change Conference in Santiago, Chile in December. So unfortunately, I will miss the next 2 council meetings. My first question is regarding the update report on Moreland Urban Forest Strategy. I thank Council for the implementation update of this important policy. My question is, did the trial and neighbourhoods program at 7.5.9 eventuate, and what was the result?
Okay, I'll just, Greg, are you the right person to answer it? Thank you.
Thank you, through the Mayor. It's obviously an action that hasn't been completed yet. I will have to take it on notice to give you a succinct update on its status. So, take it on notice. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
My second question is regarding the governance report for October 2019, and I note that the capital works expenditure, climate change was listed at 12th in the top 20 list at nearly $1 million worth of projects. I'd like to ask, what were these works for? Can you outline to me a list of these works that exemplified the cost to council already from climate change?
And Kirsten, are you the right person to answer that question?
No.
Liz? Sorry, got the wrong name here.
Sorry, through the Mayor. We'll take it on notice and get that list of projects out.
Thank you. And I'd also just like to comment, I urge councillors to support changes to the council procurement policy, which will be considered as part of a notice of motion tonight. I note that Fletcher Building is one of the companies that is actively seeking contracts for the Adani mine, and they have a subsidiary firm here in Moreland called TradeLink Plumbing. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you. Harry, Papadakis.
Hello everyone. I'm one of the owners of the property of 145 Glenlyon Road, Brunswick, and there's been quite a bit of discussion, and I think there's a motion tonight for rezoning to C3 instead of C2 or C1, and I'd just like to push our motion for our property that we'd like the flexibility to do the best we can with our property, and hopefully C1 is what we're looking at. So I just wanted to create the employment and create the stuff we want on our property.
So Harry, just for the sake of governance, just make that into some type of question.
So the question is, can the owners have the flexibility to decide if it's C1 or C2 for their own properties?
Yep, good. Are there any councillors that would like to? Are there any councillors that would like to address the question?
The director can answer it.
So,
It's asking for the director.
yeah, okay, thanks. Good. Thank you.
Thank you. The considerations with the zones for the properties relate to the Moreland Industrial Land Use Strategy, and Council has considered the Commercial 1 zone previously and abandoned that amendment in relation to the 55 properties that are left. It is considering the Commercial 3 zone at this point. That zone is considered the most appropriate for industrial land. Its emphasis is very much on employment, but does allow some portion of residential development. And Council has expert reports to support that application to those properties at this stage. But certainly the report tonight is to consider whether Council will pursue the amendment. First of all, would have to seek the Minister's approval to authorise it, and then a formal exhibition process, and then formal submissions would be sought through that, and Council will consider those before it goes any further. So at this stage, it has information before it recommending it, and it will consider everyone's submissions at the next point.
So is Council proposing C2 or C3?
C3 in the report before it tonight.
All right.
Yep.
And is it, from our side, where can we discuss this? Is there a discussion process further we can try to push our case or?
Absolutely. So if the Minister authorises the amendment, then we formally exhibit it and we ask for submissions through that process. And if Council continued to apply that zone, it would seek a panel, and there's an independent body that will also consider it as well. So there are a number of stages to go through yet before it's a formal decision.
Okay. And what was the reason? Can I?
Yeah, it's actually not a discussion, it's just a question.
Yep. Okay. All right.
Thanks. Just so you know, you're more than welcome to get in touch with anybody here or Councillor Tapanos who you were talking to before and follow up any of this stuff.
Thank you.
Jack?
Yes, sorry about that.
It's all good. We've got it in.
Jack's my name. This is, I think, the 6th time that I've been here. Hopefully the last. I know we're getting to the business end of what's happening at the LXRP project. We've heard a few, let's say, sad news at the moment with the calling in of the heritage to the minister, and that wasn't very good news. So I'm just here one last time to say a few things that might be of interest and might not be of interest. I think some people know that I've been very passionate about this project. We talked about the consultation process, and a lot of people use the word sham, where the community didn't have a go whether we go over and under. The decision was made to go over, and that's pretty final now. And also, we're learning what's going to happen to our 5 outcomes, community outcomes, especially the 3 major ones. The heritage. This corridor is a listing on the Victorian Heritage list, is Victorian Heritage listed. So the minister will make that decision. On the environment, we're going to lose over 100 trees. Look, I know that LXRP is saying they're going to replace 3 trees for every one that we chop down. If I can anthropomorphise a child, if you're going to adopt a child, it's like saying, well, we'll take the adopted child, but we'll give you 3 new childs instead. You cannot replace young seedlings, 3 seedlings, with mature trees. They've got canopy covers. They've been growing for over 50, 60 years. So it's a very weak argument that LXRP are putting through. Mr. John Kavanagh, I heard you in one of the special meetings. You went to a Coburg Heritage meeting, and you came across. I saw you on the podcast. You were very emotional in regards to this heritage corridor, and I know where you're coming from, because I would have loved our corridor. I'm getting to the question. Sorry, Mr. Abboud, I'm getting to the question.
I'm looking for the bell, Jack.
Yeah, I know you were, but it's. I was looking. It's very important that this is heritage listed. So we're losing out on our heritage, and we're losing out on the environment, and we're losing out. And the last thing I want to say is about our active public transport and what's happening at the intersection of Bell Streets, right, and the uphill bike path. So I've also got the Integration Act here, right? The Transport Integration of 2010. They are breaking the law. I'm not going to read it to you, but they are breaking the law. So the question is the responsible planning authority, has the council taken all of the available steps to fully protect itself against any future litigation that may arise involving the planning specifically at the intersection of the upfield bicycle path and Bell Street by not going over or under? Yes, we've tried very hard to have a valoway to go over, but we need to focus on this pinch point, because if we force the cyclists to go along Sydney Road, the dangerous Sydney Road, we've already lost 1 life. God forbid, I say, God forbid, right, if we lose another cyclist on Sydney Road. And I'm just giving you a heads up, because I feel, right, that my council needs to do everything it can to protect itself. Because again, I'm going to say, God forbid if we lose 1 more cyclist on Sydney Road. Thank you.
Thank you, Jack. Any councillors like to address that question? Yeah, I'm just asking if the councillors would like to address it. Thank you.
Through you, Mayor. Jack, thank you very much for your question and also your continued passion on this particular topic. There certainly are a number of residents through the municipality who are echoing the same concerns that you have spoken to tonight and previously. Your question in relation to council and its responsible authority position, sorry for the voice. We continue to work with the Victorian Government on this particular project. We've established the Community Advocacy Reference Group, which is a collective of a number of residents and interested stakeholders from across the municipality. And we continue to advocate on a number of issues, including the intersection that you're referring to at the moment. It's fair to say that the Level Crossing Removal Authority through the Alliance are currently working through some options. We haven't a definitive answer at this particular point in terms of how the treatment of that intersection will resolve itself, and we'll continue those conversations. We are trying to be as transparent as possible with all the information as it's made available to officers through our website, through Facebook channels, and also through the LXRP, who have also established a presence on Sydney Road. So at this particular point in time, I'm not sure I can actually answer your question definitively, other than to say we will continue to make sure that we advocate for the best possible outcome for the community.
Thank you, Joseph.
Follow-up question?
Sorry? Yeah.
I was just wondering, just a question to the Director following up on a point. Is my understanding is there may possibly be an alternative construction method which might save most of the trees in the gardens, and it's been put to me, I'm no expert, no engineering expert, that if Super T beams were used just in that gardens, there in proximity to the gardens, we might be able to save most of the trees. So I'm wondering if there's any information that's come to you about that, or else it's a follow-up question.
Through you, Mayor. Thank you for the question, Councillor Bolton. The short response is we have sought further information from the Alliance and from the Level Crossing Removal Authority in relation to the two different construction methodologies, one being a Super T, which is what you've referred to, the other being the U-Trough, which is what's currently proposed in the concept plans that have been provided. So we've only today received some further information from the LXRP, haven't had the opportunity for a detailed understanding or look at the response that's been provided, but we'll come back to Council with the information that we have and whether or not there's an opportunity for us to continue to advocate for a different construction methodology.
Thank you. So that brings us to the end of question time at 7:25. I'd like to thank everybody who didn't show up to ask a question for doing so, because that's the shortest question time I've ever had in my 1 year as a mayor. People are not welcome. Okay, so we'll now move on to council reports, and the first report we have to consider this evening is DCF 7819, amendments C192 and C193, Brunswick Activity Centre Industrial Land Rezoning Decision Gateway 1, authorisation and exhibition, council action plan item. Do I have a mover for this item? Councillor Martin and Councillor Riley to second. Councillor Martin, would you like to speak to it?
Yep, so I'm happy to move the officer recommendation as part of this. Really, what this amendment is seeking to do is really to guarantee employment and to an extent affordable housing within this city. I've had plenty of developers call me, email me, get their lawyers to write me letters over the last couple of weeks. And so I thank you all for reaching out and letting me know about your ability to make profit from your land portfolios. This is just the start of the process. And what will happen from here is, if it's passed by council, we'll be taking submissions on this. So you'll be able to submit reasons why you shouldn't be part of the commercial 3 zone. It'll then go to planning panels, and then there's a long process to go from here. So this isn't the final gate. This is essentially the first gate for you. So if you didn't respond to those letters where you were offered a choice of 30% employment, 20% affordable housing instead of the 50%, you can have an option to actually argue your case further from here. What these amendments are doing for everyone else is that we have a situation where a lot of our developments in our city, they ask for a residential commercial mix. What happens is we end up with 1 floor commercial, 7 floors residential. as more and more developments happen in our city, we lose the ability to have jobs in our city. People are forced to drive, they're forced to leave our city to find work. What this amendment is seeking to do is to say that these properties have to have a 50-50 split of commercial versus residential. And what that does is it locks in jobs in our city. As a council, we have a responsibility to make sure that residents are able to work close to home. We've seen strategies around 20-minute cities. And, you know, many councillors here have spoken about wanting to create that economic incentive, to create economic corridors, and even to encourage startups and new businesses in the city. And that's what this amendment will seek to achieve with these developments once they're developed. We've had the feasibility study. It said that this is economically feasible. And so I really do thank the officers for their work throughout this process. But what this comes down to is it's a discussion about whether or not we want to secure more jobs in Moreland and make sure that the residential commercial split is something that as a council we don't just leave a legacy of hundreds of new homes, but we also have opportunity for people to have jobs in the city. So I ask that councillors support the officers' work just to ensure that we can grow in this city together. Thanks.
Thank you, Councillor Martin. Councillor Riley, would you like to speak?
Yes, thank you. Yeah, I'd like to support this amendment, this recommendation. Councillor Martin's sort of addressed the sort of general thrust of it. So just in a little bit more detail, there's two aspects of this. This is Amendment 193, C193, and there's Amendment C192. And C193 includes about 55 properties. C192 is covering 2 properties because all these owners were written to, and we've actually got down to the point where a couple of them have agreed to use the commercial one zone because they responded to that letter, and they've also agreed to a minimum of 30% of the floor, gross floor area to go to employment and economic use, and they've used 20%, they're guaranteeing they're going to provide 20% for affordable housing, and so that is the other part of the process. So the ones that didn't elect to do that are going to be covered by C193, and that's where we're getting down to this C3Z zone, and Councillor Martin's addressed that. It's about getting good mix of employment, commerce, and and housing. So this is going to provide greater certainty for landowners. It's going to provide long-term expectations for our precincts. Hopefully, this mix will actually provide a really good mix of amenity in these areas. They're adjacent to activity centres, and this is part of our Moreland industrial land use strategy. And we didn't have this tool a year ago, and now we've got it. And we think, based on the reports tonight, well argued that there's good reason for considering these, and then the businesses and the owners involved can make submissions to that as well. So this is going to provide better, denser precincts. It's going to be more economically diverse. It's going to have more affordable, accessible kind of businesses there, and it's intended to sort of make space for creative industries, startups, and those kinds of things. And it sort of fits in with our design district objectives and things like that as well. So I think there's a lot of reasons why this amendment is worth supporting tonight, and it's been well documented and argued. And I think, and I'll look forward to seeing people's submissions if it is succeeded tonight, their submissions as to why they shouldn't be included in C3Z.
Thank you, Councillor Riley. Are there any councillors who'd like to speak against the motion? Councillor Tabacco.
Thank you. Thank you. I'm rising to speak against this motion, and partly I do so on firstly process, and secondly on not testing out a new zone that, in my understanding, hasn't been applied anywhere else, certainly Moreland or even across the state. That I think it still needs a significant amount of work. But I'll talk to process a little bit. We started down this journey after Mills was adopted, and we proposed a C1 for these properties, and that went through panel, and at the last minute it was abandoned. I think that was wrong, and I think we should have progressed and zoned all of these properties into a C1 and then investigated the new zone, that would have been a better process in my view. And talking about the need for more employment and up to 50% mandatory, to some degree, this process that's been followed undermines that because properties were given an option of affordable housing options. So I guess council needed to make up its mind, is this an employment zone or is this a zone for housing? And to sort of say that it's okay, you could have housing if it's affordable housing, does not provide that certainty about employment opportunities. So I think this process has not been as good as what it should have, and it hasn't stuck to the strategic goals of Mills because of that. But nonetheless, I won't talk about those two properties who have taken up that option. I think that would be a good community outcome if that does occur. But I'm concerned about the other 55, and my main concern is that they will not turn over. They will probably stay as they are because the market at the moment and into the near future is not ripe for development, particularly if landowners are required to have 50% commercial. And that 50% commercial off our activity centres is mandatory. There is no flexibility. And my concern will be that A, they won't get developed, or B, if they do get developed, in order for them to close the financial gap, they will be seeking, and I know this because they've already come to us seeking this, more heights. So what you would see is more heights in the city because of it. They will be seeking to take shortcuts and maybe not implement all of the above and over excellent design elements that we insist, including environmental sustainable design and 6 stars and 7 stars. Those things will not be able to be implemented because they will need to invest money into providing commercial space. So I think that if you really want to see good quality development, you allow the option, and the best way to do that is to have a C1 zone, to vote this down and give a strong indication to the organisation to come back next month with a C1 option report.
Thank you, Councillor Tapanos. Councillors who wish to raise new arguments in favour of the motion? Is that thinking? Are you thinking? No, sorry. Councillor Martin, would you like to close the debate?
I think most of what's been discussed, I recognise that this is really us a push and pull between trying to find the right balance between allowing speculators to make profit on their land holdings versus guaranteeing employment generating areas for our future residents. It's a decision that is tough for us as councillors. We're not here to try and put anyone out of business, but it is a decision that we have to make for the good of the whole community, and we have to keep a future focus here. While some of these properties might not get developed next year, the report does say that it is financially feasible within the next 5 years. And so this is something that as a council we need to make the decisions for the future community, and to really look forward and look beyond just the immediate pros and cons, but actually expand, look up at the horizon a little bit, and really look for the startups that we're trying to draw into the city, look for the new businesses that we're trying to create, because we really want to have a robust city that's full of economic life, not just residential properties.
Thank you, Councillor Martin. I'll put that to the vote. All those in favour? Against? Declare that carried.
Can we have that noted?
Yep, so Councillor Riley's asked for a division. All those in favour? Councillors Bolton, did you change your vote, Councillor Carly Hannon? Okay. Councillor Bolton, Councillor Davidson, Councillor Riley, Councillor Abboud, Councillor Farnley, Councillor Kavanagh, Councillor Martin. Against? Councillor Carly Hannon, Councillor Tapanos and Councillor Yildiz. Thank you, councillors. I'll now move to the next report, DCF 7919, Permanent Road Closures, Sumner Street and Piers Street, Brunswick East. Could I have a mover for this motion? Councillor Riley and a seconder? Yep. Should I go to seconder first? Yeah.
Thanks. I'm happy to move this amendment to, or promotion to actually permanently close these two roads at Sumner.
Hang on.
We need the names.
We need some names.
Yes, I know. I'm about to propose them.
Well, rather than speaking to the...
So the motion, so the names are to be the chair, the mayor, to be the chair, whoever the mayor is at the time, and the 3 South Ward councillors.
Yep, and I'll have a seconder, please. Councillor Kavanagh, thank you. Okay, go for your life, Councillor.
Thank you. This has been a trial as a result of, largely as a result of some major development happening across the road at the East Brunswick Village, and the fact that the Department of Transport moved an accessible stop, stopping traffic going across the road out of that village, and then made it, by moving the accessible stop up, they made it possible for people to drive through some local roads. So we've had to take this proactive action. I really want to congratulate the community that were behind this. Not everybody is satisfied, but I think there's about 99% are. And I know there are some people who are definitely not happy about it because it's right outside their properties and they have to take their bins up the road, etc. So I'm really sorry that has to happen, but hopefully you'll be able to manage it. And in fact, some of your community neighbours will actually help you do those things because that's what community is about. But these closures are going to be important to actually help ensure that the local roads won't be overrun by these new residents that are coming into the East Brunswick Village. And I think it's commensurate with our Moreland Integrated Transport Strategy and all the things we're trying to do about livable cities and walkable cities and so on, and this will help reduce any rat running and that kind of thing. So I want to thank the community who did a lot of surveying and preparation, and I also want to thank the officers who've done a lot of work and meetings with the community as well, and recommend this because I think it's very well supported.
Thank you, Councillor Riley. Councillor Kavanagh? Thank you. Are there any councillors that would like to speak against the motion? I'll put that to the vote. All those in favour? Against? Declare that carried unanimously, please. The next report is DCI 1719, Reserve Master Plan Construction Progress Transparency, response to notice of motion 719. Councillor Farnley?
I'd like to move the officer recommendation with an additional point 3, which reads, where a current master plan exists and is actively being implemented, provides a written update annually to the clubs or groups that are tenants of that reserve, or where no implementation is occurring every 2 years.
Thank you, Councillor Farnley. Councillor Bolton to second. Would you like to speak to the motion, Councillor Farnley?
Thank you, Mayor. Thank you. I moved this notice of motion because even I, as a resident, found it really difficult to actually understand where a lot of the master plans we're at online without having to go internally into the organisation, and I felt that it was really important that we were transparent and open with a lot of our groups and residents. I think the single most important thing for me in terms of what we can achieve as a council is to make sure that our sporting clubs, our community groups have great fresh facilities, because there are thousands and thousands of kids playing sport, engaging their community, playing music, getting together in community groups that actively use our facilities. So when we put a big plan in place to overhaul a precinct, that takes 5, 10, 12 years over multiple directors, over multiple council terms. We really need a central hub where we can actually understand where things are at and understand how long it will take to be implemented. So this is a great step forward. Essentially, we'll be bringing together online on Moreland's website a central hub where we'll have information on the key master plans. I believe there are 6 listed in the council officer's report, and a progress against each one of those master plans. And that will be really important, because not only does it provide transparency for the local clubs and local community, it also opens up a lot of transparency for other levels of government in terms of what we're investing in the local area to hopefully engage and start funding these things and getting them funded and completed a lot quicker than what we would on our own. So this is a great opportunity to do that. My slight amendment is also to keep those clubs informed, because it's such a long process. Mutton Reserve is going to take 15 years, for example, to be implemented. Just keep them informed annually in terms of progress, in terms of what's happening moving forward. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Farnley. Councillor Bolton?
I would like to just say a few words. I think this is a good motion, and especially with the extra point 3, because I think, you know, when you look at the clubs, all the clubs are sort of a bit different. Some are less resourced than others. Often the pepper running clubs, they've got full-time work, they've got children with all sorts of activities, and they're running a sports club. And they're all at different levels of technology. Some are very technologically minded, some are not technologically minded, and then you have the turnover of club officials, which means that sometimes knowledge of what's happening gets lost in transmission between different officials. And I think sometimes for a lot of pepper running clubs, they are so busy and so hectic that it is really difficult engaging with all of the bureaucratic processes of being able to, track what's happening with master plans and let alone the club leases and all the rest of it. So I actually think this is good to try and make it a bit easier for people in clubs to be able to track what's going on and be able to, relate to the whole process and intervene if they need to.
Thank you, Councillor Bolton. Are there any councillors that would like to speak against the motion?
Yeah, I just want to raise a concern. It's more a concern. I think this is a great motion, and so the fact that it's going to go on the webpage seems to me that item number 3 almost becomes redundant, or in fact that we're duplicating stuff and we're creating more bureaucracy, which is what Councillor Bolton's just referred to. If the information is going to be publicly available, I'm not sure why we need to send a letter to them. So it was more just expressing a concern that we're actually overly complicating, when in fact what this is intending to do is to make it more transparent and publicly accessible. So I don't quite get why number 3 has to be included, and I'm sort of not terribly supportive of that. I'm very happy with 1 and 2.
Would you like to split them?
I'd like to answer the concern if it...
Then you would be closing the debate, which is fine. Yeah, that's fine. Go for your line.
Okay. Thanks, Councillor Riley. Just the reason why I've included that as an additional point, not everybody jumps online constantly, actively looks to get an update. What you'll find during the budget process a lot of the times is there are amendments from councillors on the night that can affect the status and change of where we project these master plans to and how they should be delivered. And so if someone isn't aware of making sure they check after a budget process, they may be completely unaware that that football pitch that was going to be done next year suddenly got pushed back 2 years because something else got put in. I think it just make sure that there's an alert and a process for them to continually be engaged in that process. That's all that is.
Thank you, Councillor Farnley. I'll put it to the vote. All those in favour? Against? Declare that carried. Okay, DCD 2419, the Food System Strategy 2017-2020 Progress Report. Councillor Martin.
So I'd like to move a slight amendment. That is currently...
Yeah,
that's the one I want to move, yes. So if I can just explain to councillors, so what we're essentially doing is following the discussions around the $20,000 that was earmarked for the Wheat Chief Hub. We're just making note of that, making sure that...
Because you're talking to the motion, I'll just second it.
Okay, yes. So the $20,000 was surplus that we discussed at the briefing the other night. We're just noting that that's reinstated. Point 2 has been modified to inform that an updated food system strategy from 2021 onwards. So it's essentially signalling that we wish to continue with the important work that the food system strategy has currently undertaken. And so I would like to just highlight to councillors the hugely successful strategy that this has been. It's been incredibly well supported in the community. We know that this was a big gap for Moreland when we got onto council, and as one of the things that we included in the council plan was to develop a food system strategy. we know that local food systems improve the health and well-being of residents. There's benefit to the economy. It also revitalises urban environments. And it also, because we're looking at a food systems strategy approach, it also addresses the huge problem, and that is food insecurity. That is a huge issue right across our state. And so this strategy really seeks to look at all of those things and much more. And I think it's really vital work that we are doing as councillors, and I really want to make sure that important work is continued beyond this council term, because it is definitely one of our legacy strategies that we've developed, and I think we should really be proud of it and continue it into the future. It definitely shouldn't be hidden away in any other strategy.
Thank you. So the food system strategy for me is, I'm going to use an analogy that happened during the grand final. So when Pickett got substituted into Richmond and Dusty kicked that boot to him and he kicked that goal, well, that's what happened to me when I first got elected to council with the food system strategy. I got kicked a ball and I was able to get a beautiful goal, and it looked like I did all the work, but really there was a whole bunch of Dusty Martins that had delivered a big piece of work, which was all of the background, which was the food system strategy. It had been deferred the August before the council election, and it ended up getting settled, I think, the September after the council election. It was, it was brought into fruition, and it's had a fairly minuscule amount of money in terms of what the council spent. So $100,000 per annum for 2 years and $120,000 for the third year. And what it has delivered has been quite remarkable. There was, Fawkner had been identified as being what's classed as a food desert, and Fawkner has also had been identified as being a place that was really required some social cohesion and some work in terms of bedding down a new cohort into the community and making sure that the older people up there, not in age, but the more established residents up in Fawkner, were able to reach out to the newer people who were coming to that suburb. There's been quite a transition. So I think that the report really states what has been amazing about the food system strategy, the fact that we've pretty much breathed new life into, and when I say we, I mean the Dusty Martins, breathed new life into the Fawkner Bowls Club. It has a new membership, they've started a new pennant season, and the front pitch that's been derelict for years is now a working garden where we've just had a huge ton of compost from the facility that's collecting our food and green organics, Veolia, have dumped a load of compost there. We've closed the loop and been able to do that because that garden exists there. The Pentridge garden that exists down in across the way has had support from council to be able to be established, which is accommodating gardening space for people who live in a scenario where you pretty much come home, get into the elevator, go up into your apartment, and then you come out and go back into your car again. And so it's just given a space for people can hang out and be part of each other's community. And my greatest fear, and I don't know if Pickett and Martin feel like this, but is that this thing won't see another grand final. So I think that this report and whatever we can determine for the end, for the next iteration of the food system strategy is crucial, and I hope that its wins are documented in a much more efficient way than I've just managed to do in 2 and a bit minutes. But I'm really excited to see this update, and I will support the work of the food system strategy as it goes along. Are there any councillors that would like to speak against the motion? No, Councillor Martin, no one spoke against, so we'll just put that to the vote. All those in favour? And against? Could that please be declared unanimous? Thank you. Okay, I'll just flick the page and we can move on to DCI 1819, the Moreland Urban Forest Strategy 2017-2027 Update Report. Councillor Riley's on his feet.
Yep. I'd like to move the officer motion with a couple of amendments. I think they're showing up there on the board. Thanks.
Can I have a seconder? Councillor Carly Hannon.
So we want to note this report and the actions and the progress for it, and it's recommended to people to have a good close look at. But we also want to put forward a process for the 2021 budget process where we look at supporting more community engagement and enabling that. We're already doing some of this in the report, but it's about giving this a bit more support in reality. So rather than just having, we do have lots of great planting initiatives where the community come on, we organise it, they come. This is a little bit more like some of the groups that actually organise the plantings, and then they get other people to come, and then sometimes council actually assists them as well. So this is more the latter rather than the former. And so it's allowing those kind of processes to be developed and explored. And I think it could potentially lead to some good and better outcomes for the city and sharing some of those responsibilities. It's also asking for a report to consider publishing our data publicly online to look at the progress and to celebrate the key successes that we've encountered and the challenges that we have. And I want to just acknowledge Councillor Dawn, who's on leave, who's actually helped provide this, so she's not completely gone from the picture. But I think it's a good compromise to actually call for a report about it rather than ask for us to just do this, because I believe there's quite a bit of data and work involved. So I hope that will satisfy most councillors to support the motion as it's been put. So this cuts across a lot of our other strategies, at least about a dozen other strategies that we're doing in the city with the urban forest. There's a lot of activity going on, and we're also developing a biodiversity framework that actually supports that. So if you think of our city having two creeks, the Merri on one side and the Moonee Ponds on the other, and we've got a big ring road at one end sort of holding us in for some reason, and we've got some other smaller roads at the bottom, but in between we've got a lot of communities trying to create biodiversity corridors, and they've been doing this for many, many years actually. So in between the Friends of the Moonee Ponds and the Friends of the Merri, there's a lot of other groups who I won't name right now but are doing a lot of great work, and I just think this will help. The report shows that work's going, and I just think some of the amendments will actually help give it a bit more of a boost as well. So I recommend the motion is put.
Thank you. Councillor Riley. Councillor Carly Hannon.
So you might have some amendments that she wanted to put up.
Would you like to propose your amendments?
Okay, it's a fairly straightforward amendment. So to add a point 4, that future updates include information about survival rates for newly planted trees.
Councillor Riley?
Yeah, I'm fine with that. Yeah.
Councillor Carly Hannon?
Yeah, I'm fine with that. Yeah, so I definitely rise to talk about this strategy, because I think it's actually one of the most important strategies that our council does, and Councillor Riley's touched on the fact that it crosses over a whole range of other strategies that we do, and we actually have the health and wellbeing plan tonight as well. And I think one of the most important things for me is the fact that the urban heat island effect is really impacting on our most vulnerable and really all of us as residents. And going into the summer, realising that you can't just walk down our streets because they are too hot in the heat of the day. I always find that really demoralising, and I'm walking about 5 kilometres a day at the moment. So just knowing that, in the future we're going to have streets that are actually well shaded sort of gives me hope for the future of our community. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Carly Hannon. Are there any councillors Councillor Bolton? Let me just double check. There's no councillors that want to speak against this motion? Yeah, okay. So in support, thanks.
Okay, I would like to speak in support and also to explain why I moved that amendment. My reason for moving the amendment is when we adopted the urban forest strategy, it turned out that a very high percentage of newly planted trees didn't survive, either because of vandalism or for other reasons to do with climate, etc. And the urban forest strategy did talk about or did propose that we plant more mature trees than had been planted previously, with view to increasing their survival. And I'd certainly like to sort of see stats in the future on the percentage that actually do survive, because this is a really pressing issue, and it is an issue where while Moreland Council has stepped up at street tree planting, private trees are being ripped out for new developments, and so we're really chasing our tail, and the street tree planting isn't necessarily, or at the time of the urban forest strategy being adopted, we weren't increasing the tree canopy cover in moorland because of the percentage of trees that were pulled down in the private realm. So, I mean, I'd certainly like to see, a bit of a more comparison between the two. I think, I think it's good. I think we have been making some progress, and I think that's evident in the report. And then I would like to mention that there is a pocket of trees, 113 trees to be specific, some of which are over 100 years old, not all 113 trees, but 113 mature trees, but a number that are over 100 years old, which are facing being removed for the level crossing removal project. But information has come to light that if a different construction method was used, we might be able to save most of those trees. So there is a community action happening at Gandolfo Gardens beside Moreland Station on Sunday the 20th of October to try and save the trees.
Thank you, Councillor Bolton. I totally agree with what Councillor Bolton was saying about losing trees in the private realm and seeing canopy being destroyed in the private realm, and it is a terrible thing. And I'd like to just mention a couple of things that we're trying to do to speak to that. And one is Amendment C189, which looks at canopy plantings in existing setbacks at new developments, which is one way that we can have some control over the canopy in the private realm. And the other thing is the significant tree register, which is mentioned in the report. And there's an advertisement on our webpage at the moment that you can make a nomination to the significant tree register, which is open until the 18th of October. So there's still a little bit of time if you feel like there are significant trees in your neighbourhood that you would like to identify so that we can make an effort to protect them. In my neighbourhood, there have been, heaps and heaps of new trees planted, and now has been the time where I've just noticed that, the ones, specifically the ones outside Mercy College that I worried about all summer, even though we did have 7 trucks out watering, have made it and have blossomed, which is great news, because I didn't know if they would, but that's very exciting to see buds on a tree. It is even more exciting when it's buds on a tree that you thought was going to die on Sydney Road. But I also want to draw attention to Cummings and Miller Street, where we used to have a big wide bitumen road, and now we have infrastructure and planting all the way down the centre of those roads, which goes in part to help us understand why the maintenance budget and the amount of money that has been spent on planting, those thousands and thousands of trees is quite significant, because sometimes planting a tree is more than just digging a hole in the ground and plonking the tree in and walking away. We need to have tree guards, sometimes we need to dig concrete, sometimes we need to build traffic islands in the middle of roads that need the right type of infrastructure for trees to grow in them. So because we all know that when you declare a climate emergency, you need to address that, and that planting trees is one of the most obvious ways to draw down carbon. I think that the fact that the urban forest strategy exists is a credit to the council, but also the fact that it's influencing other councils, including City of Melbourne, to consult with us and come up with their own ultimately it's a canopy strategy, but a tree strategy about how we protect canopy, not only to draw down carbon, but also, as Councillor Olivia Carly-Hanna mentioned, the fact that we're also trying to protect canopy to address the urban heat island effect, which is when the sun is beaming down on a piece of concrete, that concrete will get hotter than if it hits a tree first. So I think this is a fantastic report to be able to see, and having trouble deciding which one's my favourite between this and the food system strategy, but I hope everybody will support it, and I'm sure that they will. Are there any councillors that would like to speak? Other councillors? No? I'll put it to the vote. All those in favour? Against? I declare that carried unanimously. DCD 2519, Human Rights Policy Annual Report 2018 to 2019. Do I have a mover for this report? Councillor Riley? Councillor Bolton, did you want to second? Councillor Riley, would you like to speak?
Yeah, I just want to put the officer motion as put and commend all those working groups and advisory groups that are involved in this plan. It was some years ago, just prior to this council being elected, that we adopted the approach as a human rights policy and bringing together a lot of our strategies around diversity, people with disabilities, gender and women, LGBTQI communities, and of course Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander communities. So this is a way of bringing all of those things together, and that's a really important lens, and also where people might actually come across or fit into different parts of those priority groups as well. So it's a report worth noting and having a closer look at. And if people can get involved in those advisor groups or want to come along and attend them, I'm sure we're happy for people to come and listen and learn a bit more about what's going on. There's a lot of detail in there I don't want to go into, but I just want to thank the officers, but also particularly thank all of those people who were given a Guernsey at the recent Moreland Awards in terms of their participation in those advisory committees. But we also celebrated the first award for acknowledging people who are working in the accessibility and disability realm, which is a really important initiative from the council. And then there are other awards, the Lisa Belair Awards. There's one for women as well. So we really do acknowledge a lot of those things in our awards. And I just want to thank the staff again and all the community who are in those. We had some huge number of nominations, probably the largest number of nominations we've had in a long time. So that was very exciting to see. So I support this motion. Thanks.
Thank you, Councillor Riley. Councillor Bolton, would you like to speak to it?
Yeah.
Anyone like to speak against? No. I just wanted to add one quick thing. I think that the Health and Wellbeing Plan, that's the next one. The Human Rights Policy really showcases where the community helps the council deliver its intended goals. And so many of the different working groups, and some of us sit on and attend regular meetings for, just turn up some remarkable people informing us of some remarkable things that are happening out in the community that we really need to hear about. So I think if this interests you, even in the tiniest way, it's really worth looking into how you can be involved with getting your voice to us, because it's really good for us to be able to hear how we implement the stuff that we set out to do. So I really like this report as well. I feel like it's my birthday. Put this to the vote. All those in favour? Against? Declare that carried. Unanimously. Thank you. DCD 2619, the Municipal Public Health and Wellbeing Plan, 2017 to 2021, Year 2 Annual Review. Do I have a mover for this report? Councillor Carly Hannon. Seconder? Oh, Councillor Tapanos, very good. Councillor Carly Hannon, would you like to speak?
Yes, I would. So I wanted to touch on a few items. This obviously is a really big plan, so I'll keep it brief. But one of the areas that's really important is the aquatic and leisure strategy. And I just wanted to touch on the fact that our aquatic and leisure venues are all really holding their own against, other municipalities, against the private sector. And I feel like we really owe it as a council to our community to ensure that we really make sure these are excellent facilities. We've seen that when we invest in them, we reap that return in terms of how active people are. But even in the ones where we know that we need to work more to improve those facilities, the level of community passion that goes into them and the kind of support they're providing to our community, I think, is really outstanding. Mm-hmm. I also wanted to talk about the living and ageing strategy that we're putting together, and just talking about how important it is for us, with all those other strategies we talked about tonight, to think about how we make sure that Moreland is going to be livable in the future and improve for people as we have that ageing population, because we really have such a growing population of the young and old, and I think it's really important that we look at ways that we bring everyone together and keep that strong sense of community. I'd like to really commend the work that our team's been doing with transitioning people to the NDIS and to My Aged Care. These are really complex areas for our community to navigate, and I think our team's been doing an excellent job in this area. I'd also like to say that I'm really glad to see the idea of the breastfeeding drop-in clinic for Fawkner. I've used the one here in Coburg, and I think it's a great way to support new mothers. So thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Carly-Hannon. Councillor Tapanos?
I'll be very brief. I fully support the comments from Councillor Carly-Hannon, but also just to note that this is kind of like a halfway point of this strategy. So it's a bit of a review of what we've done well, and we've made significant progress on all of the key points in the policy. Perhaps a gap that this council, considering it's declared a climate emergency, might want to consider in the future is the impact of sort of, the impacts of climate and how that will impact on the health and well-being of our residents as well. But I suspect that might be something that might come up at the next review of this policy. But just to say, well done, congratulations to all the staff who delivers this, because really good progress has been made on each and every one of those points.
Thank you, Councillor Tapanos. Are there any councillors that would like to speak against this motion? No? I just wanted to add a couple of things. If the human rights policy is where people from the community get to shine, then I think that this report shows where officers get to shine. And some of the work that's happened in this city has been absolutely remarkable. 4 new parks, the Moreland Integrated Transport Strategy, which has had successfully the amendment exhibited, which has not happened easily with a lot of amendments that we want to put up for discussion. The online tree finder, which is a tool that was designed to help those canopy trees being planted in new developments happen, because we're not just saying you have to plant a tree in the front of that development. We're saying you have to plant a tree, and here's a list of which of the trees would be suitable for the development and the space that you have, because we're showing people how this stuff can be successful. The Business Moreland website is remarkable, and the support that EcoDev have given for business in Moreland, and especially women in business in Moreland, has been absolutely remarkable. The plans for the Wheatsheaf Community Hub, there's a whole big long list. There's on page 324 is a gorgeous diagram of all of the things, and pretty much Councillor Carly-Hannon started at the beginning and I started at the end, but there's a whole bunch of stuff on that diagram that you can check out. Women and girls, the gender equality commitment, which I was involved in, the community gardens again. There's just a most remarkable amount of work that the council has done and will continue to do, and I believe that some of these things which were identified in the council plan as goals, I think that some of these pieces of work have actually drawn specific staff members to this organisation to be able to achieve those goals. People who understood what needed to be done, and I'm probably speaking towards the mode shift piece, and actually thought, I've got the know-how and I've got the design and the desire, and I understand the impact and how this might happen, and have come here and been able to really fulfil their potential, in their own personal careers, but delivering for the council as well. So I think that, again, look at me, I'm all over this agenda. It's fantastic. Any other councillors like to say anything about this motion? I put it to the vote. All those in favour? Against? Declare that carried unanimously as well. Thank you. Okay, the DBT 2119, the governance report, October 2019, cyclical report. Councillor Riley's on his feet.
Thanks. If I have a seconder, I'll speak to it.
I'm happy to second.
Officer motion is put. There's just one slight amendment, which is that, which I'll read out so that members of the gallery and people watching at home will understand that there's a new point 7. We're going to defer, the motion is that we defer the consideration of the gifts, benefits and hospitality policy for councillors at attachment 7 to this report until the November 2019 meeting.
And we need some names for 6.8.
Yes, so under item 6, we've got the Mayor there as the chair of the Saxon Street redevelopment committee with the terms of reference, and that I think we agreed that would be the South Ward councillors again.
Yep.
They're going to be busy. So if we can put their names in, that's Dorney, Riley and Tapanos. So just quickly, this is an omnibus report. It's one that comes up regularly on the council, or just about every council meeting, but it includes things like committees that we've run and held, and this one's got things like Friends of Islayu Committee, Community Committee, the Moreland Library Advisory Committee minutes. It has the Assembly of Councillors, so where we're attending meetings that we're formally a part of and representing the city on and doing the work for. And it's also got on notices items, so if your question time haven't been answered and we haven't got time to do it, you can look for your answer in here. It's also got authorising Planning Environment Act for officers, so their names are in, there's quite a few of them listed. It's got the redevelopment of 33 Saxon Street, which is one of the next big infrastructure projects we're doing for the city, and it's a huge project which isn't fully funded yet, but this is getting the initial work going on that, and you can look at the details of that online. The Council Gifts, Benefits and Hospitality Policy, while not being considered tonight, I'd recommend people have a look at it. It's about transparency for officers and councillors in terms of what offers and gifts we receive and how we account for those. So I'd really like people to take some stock of that and give us some input about it. But the other really huge item in this report is the annual report 2018-19, in which we had a special council meeting for to approve recently, and I would highly recommend it. If you only read 3 pages of this report tonight, of which the main report's got 630 pages is all, we don't have to do too much work as councillors, just sit down and spend our weekends doing this kind of things and other parts of our weeks. But if you don't want to read 630 pages, then I'd just like you to read 0.05 or 0.5% of it, which is 3 pages. I may have done the maths wrong there, but the annual report has on pages 349 of the agenda and to 351, has a list of all the achievements for this year. And the way they're framed is under the council plan that we adopt at the beginning of this council term, which is around 2017 through to next year. So we're coming into the last year of our council term. If you want to know what we've been doing, a lot of it's been mentioned tonight, and we don't need to go through it, and I don't intend to go through it, but I would really seriously encourage you to look at the Mayor's speech, which or foreword, which covers up a lot of those things we've been doing, a lot of the challenges we've been meeting, but it also lists over those 3 pages, under those frameworks of like a connected community, a progressive city, and a responsible council, all the different things we're doing. So I'd really encourage you to have a look. Particularly if you're interested in standing in council, these are the things you need to get tuned into. So I've got people shaking their head over there. I don't expect you to, but just in case you were, democracy will happen again in a year's time. So I recommend the report as is with that additional referral of the gifts, benefits and hospitality policy.
And as the seconder, I'd like to draw everyone's attention also to the annual report, and it was a great pleasure to be able to put my name to the Mayor's forward with that particular report, because it's quite remarkable. And I draw your attention to page 19 of the report, or 357 of the agenda, which is awards and citations, which were given to council. But the other thing that I would say, and this is really important, because what we're constantly trying to do is manage growth and population. And that means managing traffic, that means not building more car parks, because the cars that are going to the current car parks are already choking up the roads. It's very hard to get around the city in a car, unless you like driving slowly, in which case it's totally fine. So I would draw your attention to page 9 of the report, which talks about the number of births which we have seen in the city. So it says here, I'll quote this verbatim, we've seen a dramatic increase in births with more than 2,000 babies born in Moreland each year since 2005. In this financial year, 2,727 babies were born in Moreland. If they all have cars in 18 years, that's another close to 3,000 cars just for them. So I just want to draw everyone's attention to the fact that the city is growing and the council's doing a brilliant job of accommodating that growth, thus the awards and citations. And I hope that people will take an interest in this remarkable report that tells everybody what we've been doing. Are there any councillors that would like to speak against the report? Anyone else in support? I'll put it to the vote. All those in favour? Against? Declare that carried. Unanimously. This is quite a remarkable meeting. EMF 3219, Financial Management Report for the period ended 31 August 2019, Cyclical Report or Cyclical Report. Can I have a mover for the motion, please? Thank you, Councillor Farnley. The seconder? Oh, Councillor Carly-Hannon, thank you. Councillor Farnley, would you like to speak? No? Councillor Carly-Hannon? No, I'll put it to the vote. All those in favour? Declare that carried. EMF 3319, draft rating system review submission. I'm happy to move this. It has a slight amendment. If I could have a seconder. Councillor Davidson, thank you. So just an additional point 3 that reads, authorises the Executive Manager of Finance to share Council's submission with the Municipal Association of Victoria. The draft submission to the rating system review is fairly straightforward. We've been asked what our opinion is, and we are doing our due diligence and making a submission, and part of what that includes is that as a member of the Municipal Association of Victoria, they've shared their submission with us, and I think that it's just the right thing to do that we share our submission with them as well in case they want to add or take anything away. But also that when the MAV did share their submission with us, they asked us if we wanted to make any changes or contributions or add or take anything away. So I think that it's an easy way for us to be able to inform them of where we're at and what we're thinking with our own submission. It's pretty straightforward. Councillor Davidson?
Yeah, I'd just like to point out 2 particular points that we are putting forward that I think really stand out for Moreland Council. And one involves the way that we rate pokie venues and the value of their licence, and incorporating that value of the licence into the rating system. So Moreland's had a very strong stance in relation to pokie venues and gambling from those venues. And I think this enhances that position as well, and I hope that that submission is accepted. The other point that really stands out is the rebate for pensioners. And also solar panels on roofs and how we incorporate those into our rating system. So I really commend the officers for their hard work on this, because I think that it's condensed some very clever ideas and very fair and equitable ideas for Moreland into a document that did have a very tight word limit. So yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Davidson. Are there any councillors who would like to speak against the motion? Anyone else in support? I'll put that to the vote. All those in favour? Against? Declare that carried. DCF 8019, new private swimming pool and spa safety barrier registration and certification. Requirements. I don't have a mover for this. Councillor Davidson? I'm happy to second. Councillor Davidson, would you like to speak?
No, it's quite self-explanatory.
Thank you. There's one thing that I did want to mention, which was a little bit of a red flag for me with this, although it doesn't mean that I wouldn't support it. It's just that I see a potential problem, which is a great concern, that we hear sometimes about surveyors, and we hear that surveyors sometimes, same as when back in the old days when people were driving more bombs than they do now, you'd go to the Dodgy Brothers and get your roadworthy, and then you'd be able to drive your car home and everything would be sweet, because it would be only a tiny chip in the windscreen, right? Now, I'm concerned that there are some building surveyors who do tick stuff off, and this has been proven heaps, yeah, exactly.
With the cladding issue.
With the cladding issue and with other issues that are still playing out right now in the city. But then I heard of a surveyor who wanted his ticket torn up at VCAT so that he couldn't get pinged for the stuff that he'd signed off. So I'm very jumpy about surveyors and inspectors. Now, what this is suggesting, and it's not a council piece of work, it's being delivered to us to deliver by the state, which is totally fine, that's not the issue, but it does say that the idea is that these surveyor inspectors will be specifically just for this role, which will be pool inspections, and they'll need to be trained. So my concern is just flagging that, considering that the number of children that, I think, I can't remember what the statistic is, but it's astronomically high, children under 5 who die of accidental deaths, die in pools. It's just, that's what happens. And I think that if we're not absolutely sure that the pools are being inspected legitimately, which is the case with council officers doing that work, because the council officers have been doing it for a long, long time. This will be a new role that people will do a short course to be trained to be competent in. So, I've banged on about it for a while, but you get the gist. This is something that I think might raise its head in the future. Is there anyone that would like to speak against it? No, I'll put it to the vote. All those in favour? Against? Declare that carried. EMF 3419, proposed telecommunication lease with Telstra, Francis Street, Oak Park. Do I have a mover? Councillor O'Farnley? Councillor Yildiz, would you like to second?
I'll have the names if you'd like.
Mayor and North West councillors?
Yep.
So Councillor O'Farnley was moving and Councillor Yildiz was seconding, and we'd nominated the Mayor and the North West councillors to hear submitters. Councillor O'Farnley, would you like to speak?
No.
Councillor Yildiz? No. I'll put that to the vote. All those in favour? Against? Declare that carried. Councillors, we'll now move to notices of motion. I ask that you please start by stating the motion, and if there is a seconder, you may speak to it. And the first notice of motion we have this evening is 5319 building site waste, and it's mine. I submitted it. Could I have a seconder, please? Councillor Bolton. So this was something that came about because I ran into a resident in the foyer who then needed to have a chat, and part of what we spoke about in the Mayor's office was the fact that the resident had noticed with increased development around the place that on some occasions and more often, domestic bins were being used for construction waste. And that sort of opened up a can of worms about the fact that we probably would do well just to do a few checks and balances about what we know about where construction waste is going and what avenues exist to reduce construction waste from going to landfill. And when I did a bit of research, I noticed that there are, the EPA recommends that if you're going out to get a quote from somebody who's going to take your waste away from a construction site, not to go with the cheapest quote, because sometimes that stuff is dealt with in an inappropriate way. And we know that we have huge issues with waste in this country on every level. And so I think that it's worth raising a little bit of awareness about this, and that's what prompted me to submit the notice of motion. Councillor Bolton?
Yes, I would like to support this motion. I think there are major issues with disposal of construction waste, combination of things of lack of recycling of things that are able to be recycled, but also the dumping of asbestos. And that this is a problem that is made worse by the fact that we do have private building inspectors or private building surveyors, and they're the ones who give the permits for demolition, which then can mean that, sometimes houses that are highly likely to contain asbestos get crunched up within a day, and there's asbestos flying around and people are not aware of the asbestos flying around on site. And then, there are issues of illegal asbestos dumps or illegal construction waste dumps with asbestos in it, and we've seen issues of illegal chemical dumps in the northern suburbs, particularly in Campbellfield, blowing up spectacularly last year, or earlier this year. So I think, I think it would be good, to pass this motion, and there are probably other things that council can do to think about what it can do to manage the issue of construction waste. I think it actually is a big issue, and especially from a point of view of safety of the community.
Thank you, Councillor Bolton, and for your support with the second too. Are there any councillors that would like to speak against the motion? I'll put it to the vote. All those in favour? Against? Declare that carried.
Is that unanimous?
Yes.
That is unanimous.
Thank you. The next notice of motion is 5419 GHD Consultancy Group and Adani Mining, and this is something that I submitted as well. Almost 3 years ago, this same group of councillors Sorry, I need a seconder. Thank you, Councillor Wilson. Sorry. Now. Okay, so almost 3 years ago, this council resolved a general business item. We used to have a general business item that we would write to all state and federal parliamentarians whose offices lie within the council boundaries and to the Prime Minister, the federal opposition leader and the Queensland Premier, expressing our strong opposition to the proposed Adani 2.3 billion tonne coal mine in Queensland's Galilee Basin. And so when I was asked by the Australian Conservation, can't remember what they're called now, doesn't matter. Foundation, thanks everybody. To put a notice of motion through asking that we commit to rule out further work, that we ask GHD to commit to rule out further work on Adani's coal mine. It was a bit of a no-brainer. What's been happening more and more often through the community is that as we come to terms with the fact that depending on what level of urgency you put on it, we have a serious issue with our climate. Things are changing rapidly. We have bushfires happening now that don't usually happen. People are losing their homes in Queensland and New South Wales. There's no water. There's crazy dust storm and drought in New South Wales. All of us eat, all of us need farms to survive, and all of the obvious things. That digging a massive coal mine and burning coal is kind of like the opposite thing of planting a tree. If you want to put carbon in the atmosphere, that's what you do, is burn coal. And there's a sort of new movement, I think, where we try to identify who the companies are that we're dealing with and what kind of business that they're in. You know, probably started for some people with not going to Coles and Woolies if the farmers aren't getting a good deal and opting for a farmer's market where you can buy straight from a farmer. But we're starting to take more responsibility for what we consume and what those channels are for those businesses and where they have their money, because really this all comes down to money. So I think that for councils and for other organisations to start signalling to groups like GHD, who do a massive amount of work for us and the work is of great quality, that we want them to be accountable for the other work that they do, is a really important thing for a council to be doing. So, you know, as the mayor for a little bit longer and being asked to do this, I didn't hesitate. And I really hope that GHD will hear the call about, you know, living a better life and having a better ethos and getting your money from somewhere that doesn't destroy something so valuable to so many people. And that's before you drill down to all of the detail. Adani is just, it's a furphy, you know. The jobs that will be created aren't there. The damage that it will be doing is not being identified honestly. And so, yeah, I think this is a story that's already been told many, many times, and I'll ask Councillor Bolton if she likes to speak.
Yeah, I will speak. Council's on record as being committed to emergency action to stop climate change. It's on the record for opposing the Adani coal mine for that very reason. The mine isn't built yet, even though it's received some approvals. The approvals were both extracted with effectively guns held to the head of the environmental bureaucrats to say, you know, a decision needs to be made within 2 weeks, and with certain implications. So, and some of those processes are under challenge, under legal challenge for not having been done in a correct kind of manner. Not much work has been done on the mine, so it's possible for the mine to still be stopped. And many companies are basically refusing to work on the Adani coal mine. If the Adani coal mine goes ahead, there are another couple of rich Australians who've lined up to also build coal mines there, Gina Reinhardt and Clive Palmer. So it's not just this mine we need to stop, it's actually future, the whole development of the Galilee Basin, not to mention the draining of the water table underneath as a result of this mine. So I definitely support this resolution, and in fact I thought we had something similar to this in the procurement policy already, but I certainly support adding something into our procurement policy about excluding future contracts, tenders, or business dealings with companies involved in the Adani mine and associated rail infrastructure projects. I think if this project goes ahead, it'll be devastating for Australia, and there need to be alternative jobs created for those workers who are reliant on the on mining activity in the area.
Thank you, Councillor Bolton. Are there any councillors who would like to speak against the motion? Councillor Kavanagh.
Thank you. Yes, as mentioned in the background there, I seconded the motion to write to parliamentarians opposing the Adani mine in 2017. And I'm also supportive of Council's procurement policy, which in parts reads, to support achievement of objectives and targets within Council's environmental strategies, in particular zero carbon evolution, water map and waste and litter strategy. Council will minimise its impact on the environment by purchasing goods, services and construction will avoid air, water and soil pollution to minimise natural resource and biodiversity depletion. But in saying that, I don't support this motion. If we look carefully at the 2 points of the motion, number one asks us to write to GHD asking for a commitment to rule out further works on Adani's coal mine and associated infrastructure of the Adani Rail project. I didn't know anything, to be honest, about GHD until the last week, but I mean, I've done some research, and admittedly some of that research is from their own website, so I accept that. But like, they are an enormous company that are actually doing enormous work around the world, and some of it is extremely environmentally friendly work in reducing, in encouraging recycling in South America, and doing a whole range of things. So I don't know exactly what GHD's role is in the Adani mine, but to me, they might be actually working to mitigate some of the damage of the Adani mine by putting in practices that are actually positive in their work. So I'm ill-advised in their role, and that's the first point. The second is, I feel as if our policy at the moment is a general policy. It doesn't itemise one particular company to have in the gun, if you like. I think that's bad form. I really think that is bad form, and I think it's overstepping Council's role. I also had another point there, which I'm just looking at. Yes, I just think that might be, we might actually have an unintended consequence. I also feel as if it would stop some companies. The second point talks about any excluding from future contracts, tenders or business dealings with any companies involved in the Adani mine and associated rail infrastructure project. So a company that's supplying railway sleepers wouldn't be able to supply in North Queensland, wouldn't be able to supply. We'd be stopping them from working with us in the future. I think that's too big a reach. I think it's far too big a reach. I think it could have unintended consequences, such as in our waste and recycling. We might be ruling out companies that have got really good practices that happen to be working on this project. I think it's wrong.
Thank you, Councillor Kavanagh. Are there any councillors who would like to speak in support of the motion? No. I'll put that to the vote, I think. Oh, well, no one else spoke in favour. Thanks. I'll put that to the vote. All those in favour? Against? I declare that lost. Councillor Yulis.
Yes.
Provide the Coburg Town Hall for a community meeting. 9th. It's 9th of October, isn't it?
Yeah.
Notice of motion 5519.
I think everyone's read the amendment.
Do you have a seconder?
Oh, sorry. Can I have a seconder to that, please? Thanks.
Oh, you both were exactly the same time.
Thank you.
Councillor Farnley.
Thanks, Ali. There was a mistake. I do apologise in communication with them, and it's pretty straightforward. It's just the dates changed. Actually ends up being cheaper by having it this evening. But can I just acknowledge Jodie Watson and Sally, in particular Jodie though, are very always willing to please. It wasn't until this morning when I got the call and they had pretty much mucked up the dates. But they'd written Thursday the 9th, but tonight's the 9th. So anyway, sorted it out. Can't believe how quickly she was able to logistically organise this. So And also, that should be changed to 15 to 20 people, because I don't think there's more than 15 there tonight anyway. So, yeah, it's pretty straightforward.
Cheers. Councillor Farnley?
No further comment.
Anyone like to speak against the motion? Put it to the vote. All those in favour? Against? Declare that carried. Notice of motion 5619. Ron Dorry. Councillor Kavanagh.
Thank you, Mayor. Yes, this motion talks about Ron
Shall I second
Dorey.
it?
Yeah, of course you can. I'm sorry.
Okay, I will.
I'm sorry, I should have.
That's okay, no drama.
It asked to install a seat adjacent to the recently opened Gowan Brae Community Centre in his memory and attaches a plaque acknowledging that his contribution to the local community and to liaise with his partner is on the wording on the plaque. I first met Ron in November 2004. And even at that stage, with Gowan Brae being a very young suburb of some 400 residents at that stage, Ron had been involved right from the very beginning of Gowan Brae and was the vice president of the then Gowan Brae Action Group, and then which became the Gowan Brae Residents Group. In the intervening 15 years, Ron's been an integral member of the Gowan Brae community, and unfortunately, since the last meeting, Ron passed away after a long battle and a very courageous battle with illness. This motion basically asks to recognise his contribution, a person who'd been on those committees for the entire life of Gowan Brae and had basically loved his suburb probably as deeply as anyone can love their local community. He loved the environment that is in Gowan Brae, he loved the people of Gowan Brae, he loved every single aspect of it. You know, really in many ways he was, like, in my view, the king of Gowan Brae. So if there is such a thing. And so this motion just is a small token of council recognising the contribution that he's made. And I know that the Gowan Brae Residents Association, the current committee, which are first of all devastated by his loss, but also very supportive of council in recognising something.
Thank you, Councillor Kavanagh. I've never met Ron, but I was at the community garden planting the day that he passed away, and I didn't hear that had happened until afterwards. And I was at the community garden planting with Councillor Yildiz and some members of the Gowan Brae residents community, Gowan Brae residents group, and it was quite a remarkable thing. And because I was at the garden and then Councillor Kavanagh informed me that Ron Dorry had passed away, and then I was asked by Craig Griffiths that I attend Ron's funeral. So Craig and I went to Ron's funeral, and it was quite a remarkable experience and quite an amazing story about a guy that, he did love Gowan Brae, but he also did quite a lot of amazing things in his community and for the people in his lives, including his two stepchildren and foster daughter. And hearing them all speak was, as moving and emotional as any funeral ever is. And so it really struck me that, again, this is what council brings into your life, is you just get exposed to all of these amazing people that do all of these incredible things. Welcome to the chamber, former Mayor Higginbotham. That you just have no awareness of unless you're right in their orbit. And so I think the idea of putting some type of memorial, potentially on a chair or on a rock or something at the garden is exactly the right thing to do. And I was at the residents' meeting last Thursday and flagged the idea with them, and they were very receptive to it. So I think this is a nice thing for us to be able to do, to memorialise Ron's story in Gowan Brae, which is a very unique suburb of the city of Moreland. Is there anyone who would like to speak against the motion? I'll put it to the vote. All those in favour? Against? Declare that carried. Notice of motion 5719, Memorandum of Understanding on Major Projects. Councillor Bolton.
So this is, before any...
Shall we get you a seconder?
Okay.
Seconder.
I was just going to read it out for people who...
Councillor Riley. Thank you.
For people who might not have seen the agenda beforehand, this is a motion that any memorandum of understanding signed by council with state or federal government departments for a major project, that the council vote on the terms of the MOU. And there's a second point that a report summarising the purpose and duration of all current MOUs between Moreland and other bodies be prepared and reported back to Council. This motion was motivated by the fact that Council has an MOU with the Level Crossing Removal Authority, but it was really until earlier this year, none of the councillors were aware of this, and also people in the community weren't aware of it. And I think there was a lot of community frustration about problems with the level crossing removal projects. So it's really just to give councillors an opportunity to, have a look at the sort of terms of MOUs before council signs off on them. I understand they're a practical mechanism for the different levels of government to operate together and make sure that projects are suitable for all parties. But I think there does need to be, more understanding of what MOUs exist, especially as otherwise members of the community can start to feel that, as happened this year, a bit suspicious about the MOU between council and the Level Crossing Authority. So I think this is just a way of making things more transparent and for the community to have some sort of understanding about who the council has MOUs with.
Thank you, Councillor Bolton. Councillor Riley?
I think Councillor Bolton's covered it very well. I just wanted to reiterate that this is really about trying not to go down the utopia road and creating sort of confusion and distrust, as Councillor Bolton has alluded to. So the additional point 2 has been added because we want to actually ensure that transparency and make sure people are very clear about that. And so sometimes these things do get a bit knotted and a bit complicated when they don't need to be. So I think this is a good way of giving some good transparency to that and making sure that there's a little bit of extra trust in the way that we operate. And I know that we do that well with the community and with officers, and sometimes not so well with councillors, but these things do have tests from time to time, but they're important that we try and keep it as clear and transparent as possible. So I think it's a good way of doing it, and I thank those who've had input into this and getting this developed. Thanks.
Thank you, Councillor Riley. Are there any councillors that would like to speak against the motion? Put that to the... Oh, you would?
Yeah, I would.
Sorry.
Yeah, look, this is a difficult one because I agree with the sentiments of it, but I'm afraid that it may sometimes hamstring the organisation. Now, we have a lot of confidential projects that will be coming to council into the future. They do require partners. Those partners do have commercial arrangements and many things that are in confidence. And it would be nice to be able to give the officers the ability and the freedom to be able to have an MOU about the way they operate, about the way they share information, without it having to come to the public forum. I feel that if that were to occur, you might find that some people would be reluctant to enter into MOUs, and what you are actually doing is probably, in your pursuit for a more open and accountable government, which I completely support and understand, is you might be hamstringing the organisation and might putting us in a really disadvantaged position to be able to get good outcomes, to be able to attract partners, to be able to implement our vision into the future. So I think that is a real risk. We have confidential items of business. We need to recognise that MOUs sometimes need to be confidential. They need to be able to be entered into quickly by officers to be able to create trust, to be able to get projects off the ground and implement our vision, things we want to see.
Thank you, Councillor Tapanos.
Can I just ask a question?
Of course.
I'm probably of the mover, actually. Do you envisage, mover, that if there was confidential information, that the memorandum would come as a confidential report occasionally? Or would it always be in a public forum?
Well, I've left that open.
Yes.
So, obviously, commercial in confidence is commercial in confidence, and council would, work out some procedure whether the MOU was considered in confidence or the information that was based on will be considered in confidence.
Can I just ask a follow-up? So basically, I interpreted this as councillors, if you like, need to approve the MOU. It may be in a public meeting or it could be in a confidential meeting report. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's right. Thank you. Would anyone like to speak in support of the motion? Councillor Bolton, would you like to close it? I would like to have the right of reply. So I think, as the Councillor Kavanagh asked, there are ways around it. I haven't specified in confidence in public. It could be a bit of both, as we do have a number of reports like contracts and so forth that we vote on in council, where the figures, the information provided by the tenderers, etc., is considered confidentially, but we actually vote on, awarding the contract in public, so people actually know who we're giving the contract to, and usually know who the other companies are that were considered. I actually do feel that, there is far too much secrecy by corporations and various levels of government, and I think actually it is the community's right to know who council has MOUs with. But obviously, if there is something that really needs to be confidential, it can be dealt with in that way. And also, I probably should have specified an actual figure as to what I mean by large projects. But certainly, level crossing removal program is a massively large project, which is going to shape the city, for probably the next 100 years. It'll be there, or maybe longer. Who knows? But I think, the community needs to feel some confidence in council and whoever its partners are, and we also, I think, given that these MOUs are signed on behalf of council, I think, especially for large projects, I think council laws need to have some input into it, or be aware, at the very least, be aware that these agreements exist. Thank you, Councillor Bolton. Councillor Tapanos, Councillor Bolton just closed the debate.
Okay, if she was willing to just make it really clear about the option of confidential and open, I would be happy to support the motion.
Well, she's closed the debate, so I have to put it to the vote because it didn't happen earlier in the debate.
I think that's been stated anyway, so.
Sure, thank you. So I'll put it to the vote. All those in favour? Against? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Oh, I declare that lost. Okay. The next motion we have is notice of motion 5819, Inclusive Employment Program. Councillor Bolton again. I'm happy to second. Okay, so this is a motion to receive a report from council officers that makes recommendations about an inclusive employment program. And probably in a sense, I'm sort of following up on something which was passed in the last term of the last council, which I really sort of don't know what ended up happening out of it, which was about looking at a sort of a program for Indigenous employment, where I think some other councils, it might have been Banyule or Whittlesea or somewhere around that direction, actually had made some really good progress. And I think, I'd like to see some recommendations. Obviously, with the Human Rights Committee now, there are a range of different disadvantaged groups that we're looking at, including people with disabilities and other groups within the community. So I'd like to certainly see, A, what our progress has been, but also B, I'd like to see what sort of proposals we can bring forward to go forward, because certainly some councils have done some good work on this. Thank you, Councillor Bolton. As the seconder, I'm very happy to second this because it's policy goal 1, Council of the Human Rights Policy, that council is an inclusive organisation. Action 1, develop an inclusive employment strategy. But the detail is that target was December 2020. So ultimately what this is doing is bringing it forward by a year. Initiate it. And so I'm looking forward to hearing what
the report is at the end of this year rather than having to wait till the end of next year. Are there any councillors that would like to speak against the motion? We'll put that to the vote. All those in favour? Against? Declare that carried unanimously. Notice of motion 5919, the Moreland Integrated Transport Strategy Parking Restrictions and Amendment C183. Councillor Tapanos.
Thank you. I move the motion as listed. If I have a second, I'll speak further.
For the second.
Saw Councillor Carly-Hannon first. Sorry, Councillor Yildiz Tapanos. Councillor Yildiz.
Thank you. This is quite a simple one. It's talking about delaying the implementation of the parking restrictions, the bulk parking restrictions within 200 metres of activity centres, which are envisaged in the Moreland Integrated Transport Strategy, which was adopted earlier this year, I believe. And I guess, councillors, at the moment we also have another piece of work, which is an amendment to the planning scheme, C183, which talks about reducing the need for car parking in developments to zero and placing for the first time a maximum. So I guess in that consultation we are getting a lot of residents who are talking about how this impacts on them, just parking in their street and not really necessarily probably addressing the key elements of the amendment, but certainly the bulk restriction and the notice of the bulk restrictions is certainly having an impact, I feel, on the amendment, and that's been seen in the submissions that we are receiving. But more importantly, if you actually have a read of the MITS document, the bulk restrictions are required because of the amendment, because of the impacts of the amendment if that is successful. The amendment, for those in the gallery who don't know, will create additional pressures in our neighbourhood, will mean that those residents who do have a car but don't have access to a permit will need to drive further out to be able to find a car park. But that amendment hasn't been adopted. In fact, it's only just been proposed and it hasn't gone through an independent panel process and it's got a long way to go. So I guess what I'm aiming to do tonight is to say, if the amendment was the justification for the bulk restrictions, it is correct process, in my view, to hold off on those restrictions until after the amendment has been adopted. And we can do it quite quickly at that stage. It doesn't make an argument for or against, it acknowledges the implementation should occur after the amendment because the amendment was the reason for the bulk restrictions in the first place. And I just feel that we are sending a wrong message to the community if we don't do this, because we're sending a message of this amendment is a fait accompli. Look, we're already mitigating against it by introducing bulk restrictions when we don't even know if it's going to be adopted by the panel, by the minister. So I think from a process, from a perspective of keeping an open mind, it would be better to delay this implementation until after the amendment's been adopted.
Thank you. Councillor Carly-Hannon.
Yep. So just to follow on from what Councillor Tapanos has already said, I guess one of the concerns is that the Moreland Integrated Transport Strategy is a big policy, and it's something that I think, as Councillor Bolton's been talking about tonight, that need for council involvement and transparency in something this big, I think, is really important. And it does feel a little bit like there's a lot of policy on the run here, with a lot of elements around it saying, you know, this temporary fix here or this temporary fix there, that's not really resolving some of the big challenges and concerns that have been raised around the policy, particularly with a lot of the discussion around the CEO being able to make decisions on parking. I mean, for me, having the top be able to try and deal with all these little elements of a huge policy like that demonstrates that it's an uncooked policy and that we need to actually be looking at it closely. Not to say that the system's completely broken, but that we need to actually be able to have that lens to fix some of the problems that we've seen are arising from the policy.
Well, thank you, Councillor Carly-Hannon. Are there any councillors that would like to speak against the motion? Councillor Martin.
Thank you. So what this notice of motion is doing is seeking to unwind a previously adopted position of council, a position that was adopted 10-1 in the chamber, I believe. It will impact internal budgets. It's going to cause undue pressure on our officers to meet the timelines of our strategy. And this is not the same as C183. This is a different action within our holistic integrated transport strategy to improve transport and traffic within the city. By deferring these bulk parking changes, it throws out all timelines, including those for trialling our new transitionary permits for residents and the vast number of temporary permits for those working in the city. Many residents are already feeling under pressure from the amount of development within our streets, and a key action from this strategy and from moving these bulk parking amendments is to protect existing residents' rights to park in their own street. Those that have put forward this motion are seeking to make it so residents who cannot currently find a car park in their street have to go through a time-consuming process of petition and campaigning to lobby their neighbours to allow them to eventually get parking permits placed in their street so they can park in front of their homes. And this is a lengthy, reactive implementation process of our 2011 parking policy, instead of what we've agreed that is the direction of council and that where we want to go, and that is a proactive and future-focused strategy and implementation. You know, we've had this debate. We had this debate in the chamber, and it was lost. This notice of motion is opportunistic, especially when there is a Greens councillor not in the room. And what it does, it's a bid to overwhelm the new council into repealing our transport strategy, because these delays will put pressure on the new council, and this is a purely political move, and it is not in the best interests of the residents and the implementation of what is one of our legacy strategies in this city. So I ask that councillors wholeheartedly reject this notice of motion, support our officers and the amazing work that they have done, and continue along implementing what will be a legacy strategy within our city. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Martin. Councillor in support of? In all fairness, I should put that to the vote. As much as
reply?
In support of Councillor Tapanos's motion.
I'd like to see a little bit more debate. I'd like to
Okay,
see...
sure. Councillor O'Farley, did you want to speak against the motion?
No.
So you want to speak in support of the motion? Or you don't want to speak?
I thought that it goes straight to close the debate.
Oh, right. I didn't understand what you're indicating. I thought you were indicating that you wanted to speak, but you're indicating that you wanted Councillor Tapanos to speak. Councillor Bolton?
Everyone will always want to hear Councillor Tapanos.
Oh, they might. That's okay.
Well, I guess I'm a speaker against, but I've got some reservations as well. I think that, I think there are some problems with what we passed, and certainly, I supported the general thrust of our Moreland integrated transport strategy, but I was definitely opposed to the zero parking developments, because I think they create a lot of problems, especially for healthcare workers, maintenance workers, people moving furniture in and out of their apartments. I think the parking restrictions are a bit of a separate issue, and I think the key element with the parking restrictions is, I think there are some problems with parking restrictions, but really it's more a question, I think, of negotiating and working out some special arrangements so that people who have to drive door to door, like health workers and so forth, maintenance workers have an ability to be able to park in the city. I'm really sort of not keen on this motion, which ties the parking restrictions in with the planning scheme amendment. I possibly, if it was talking about trying to work out the parking restrictions so that they, weren't so problematic for health workers who have to visit people in their homes and so forth, then I might support something. But I think I'm opposed to this as it stands.
Thank you, Councillor Bolton. Other councillors wish to speak? Councillor Riley.
Look, I'm speaking against this, but I just want to be clear that in response to Councillor Bolton's concerns, many of those issues are being taken up, Councillor Bolton, and we're in terms of the implementation for the rollout of the 2-hour parking restrictions from Monday to Friday, with giving people to get access to properties to do maintenance, for healthcare workers. All of those things are being taken into consideration at the moment, so I don't have any concern about those at all. There are going to be options for people to be able to buy visitor permits. You'll be able to buy an extra permit in the first year or two to actually, for those who have lots of cars in their families or their households, to actually be able to work out a transition if they do need to actually offload or find a private parking spot so it's not on the street. I think that with our policy and the implementation for it is very rigorous, it's very thoughtful, it's very considerate, and it's actually making sure that we're actually allowing people to park for 2 hours free in these very densely populated parts of the city. It's also making sure that we're not having people who are coming to train stops and tram stops and parking all day and clogging up our streets to get on public transport. It'd be really good if they were using active transport or buses to get there, and this will actually encourage them to do that further. So a lot of these things that we're doing under the transport plan is that. There's been a suggestion that the CEO is going to have all this ability to do stuff. That's absolute furphy. There's provisions in the transition to be able to give the CEO an ability to consider complications or scenarios that we haven't considered. It's not to actually interfere. And there are actually provisions in there and criteria to make sure that it's equitable, it's fair. To suggest that they're going to have undue influence, I think is absolutely, I haven't heard that kind of argument put in this chamber in the 3 years I've been here. I'm really a bit concerned about it. This is not policy on the run. We spent over $500,000 doing this. We spent 18 months negotiating it and working with our community and engaging with our community on it. And I agree that this is actually trying to actually further complicate it when in fact this is about C1A3, which is about limiting the parking, amount of parking to go into multi-unit developments. And I'm getting emails from people about 2 hour, their parking rights on the street. They are linked, but they're two separate issues. And I think we can chew gum and walk at the same time in terms of rolling out the 2 hour parking, because there is already an existing problem. We've got huge increases in our population at the moment. We've got lots of visitors and people wanting to transact and do business here. We are allowing them to come for 2 hours to do that. We're not stopping them. We're actually encouraging you to come. We just don't want you to come and park all day and clog up our streets. That's what this is about. That's essentially what this is about. And to think and to suggest otherwise, which is what's been happening, I think is actually really disingenuous.
Thank you, Councillor Riley. A lot of my 2 cents as well. Regarding policy on the run, we had a draft version of the Moreland Integrated Strategy, which came through the chamber, was tweaked on the way through the chamber, was put out to the community. 40,000 letters were sent. 800 submissions were made from the community to this place. About 150 of those submissions were heard in a hearing at the Brunswick Town Hall. And then it came back through the chamber for another tweak, and then it was adopted with, 19 amendments? Between 16 and, there was 2 hours of debate on this thing. This is not policy on the run. This took a hell of a lot of work and time, and I think that it's kind of not fair to the people involved who were engaged in the process to say that it's policy on the run, because it's not happening now. If it's policy on the run, the changes that are being proposed are on the run. I don't know if it's politics, but I've had conversations with the member for Pascoe Vale who completely didn't understand this piece of work, didn't understand the MITs, didn't understand the amendment, and I had to explain it, and we'll get back to her with a one-pager so she can explain it to the residents who rely on her as a local rep. Then I had a conversation this week, just try not to start yelling, with the federal member for the seat of Wills who didn't understand this piece of work and couldn't separate the amendments from the parking restrictions and didn't understand why they were important. And I also met with the member for Brunswick who didn't have any questions about this work and understands it perfectly. So I don't know if it's political or not, but what I do know is that this notice of motion was submitted in an email with a second notice of motion, and that doggy-doo has been taking up the media all week. And this notice of motion that matters when we've declared a climate emergency, when we've intended to change mode shift in the city, is what counts. And it talks to me loudly about what the media does with information, but it also tells me that this was trying to sneak through the chamber. And it is work that all of us have been heavily engaged with, and it's not going to sneak through the chamber, and it won't be getting my support.
Fair enough.
Councillor Kavanagh?
Can I also speak against? Can I also point out a couple of things? First of all, in the initial paragraph, there's a couple of things there that I think are worthy of attention. First of all, it says that it was adopted by Council in March 2018. It was actually adopted March 2019. And it also states the minimum parking requirements, and I quote, allow for zero car parking in new developments. I actually think that's a bit of a misunderstanding. Yes, it allows for the possibility of zero parking in developments. It doesn't mean that you have to provide zero developments. It means that the market will decide. It doesn't mean that there is zero parking. And I think it's actually quite important that that's put on line 3 of the notice of motion, because it would make people think that every new development will have zero parking. That's not the aim of the policy, right? Quite clearly. The other thing I want to say too is, yes, the 40,000 letters, I'm glad you brought that up, Mayor, because I signed those, I signed one of them when I was Mayor. Otherwise, I spent the whole 12 months just signing, but anyway. And that went to 40,000. I remember last time I mentioned that in the chamber, a gentleman emailed me and said, well, I didn't get a letter. It was to everybody that's in the activity centres and the 200-metre radius of the activity centres that would be possibly affected. And I actually like the fact that Council has been flexible in this. In June this year, a council officer report, not a notice of motion from a councillor, a council officer report from the Director of City Futures said, we've noticed a few things that we think might be difficult. So that report outlined a few minor changes to take into account things that had arisen since March. I think that was a good report. I think it was well received by councillors and by officers. So, and I like the fact that the CEO has delegation to make a decision, an important decision, but not a preferential decision to one group ahead of another, right? An important decision. I actually think that's good. I think that means it doesn't have to come a month later. It means that people can have things resolved very quickly if a situation observes that wasn't an unintended consequence of a good decision. So in essence, I don't support this notice of motion, and I continue to support the Moreland Integrated Transport Committee.
Thank you, Councillor Kavanagh. Councillor, any other councillors like to speak? Councillor Farnley. You did. Go on.
Thank you. Just on the comments a little earlier on the local member and both federal and state not understanding the motion, understanding the purpose of MITS and what we're trying to achieve and the different elements within it. I think councillors will recall during the adoption of MITS, I spent a lot of time even lobbying a number of councillors on different aspects, especially with zero car parking. I spent hours on this and pulled councillors aside and officers aside. And I have to put my hand up, even after adopting it, there are still elements of MITS that I still struggle to understand. And it is a very big, complicated policy. I spent hours on it with so much research. So I don't blame people of the community. I don't look down on people of the community that don't completely understand MITS. It is so big and complex. Things come out after it that you may not have been aware of. And one of the key factors, key areas of those is, the chair of one of the largest health organisations come out with big concerns regarding their ability for their staff to move around and work effectively. That I just wasn't aware of the gravity of the impact it would have on that organisation. Now, so I don't sort of judge people that continue to not get their head around this. Just in regards to what Councillor Tapanos is actually moving at, I just don't think it is as the way it's been painted. I don't believe it's a political motion in terms of it is addressing a particular process. So if I actually read the motion, it is asking for us to wait for the adoption of C183 for that process to go through before we continue with the implementation. That makes complete sense. So let's let that process go through before we actually adopt it. I think that arguing, do you actually believe in climate change or MITs and all that stuff within this motion actually isn't what the motion is asking for, and tying that in isn't actually correct. The words of the motion are quite clear. It's asking for a process to take place before we actually go further. And I'm happy for that, because the more discussion we have, engagement we have with the community, which is some of the stuff that Councillor Bolton was talking about earlier, the more things continue to flesh out. It's only probably going to improve MITS overall, if anything. With that, I don't think doing more engagement will actually hurt it. It'll actually probably improve it, because there may be elements like the health organisation where we can actually make changes to actually improve the overall policy. And I do believe there is a direct link between obviously zero car parking in developments and some of the changes we're making to the parking strategy on street. They are completely linked.
Councillor Tapanos.
Thank you. I'm actually surprised by some of the debate as well, because I think some of the councillors speaking against this have been quite defensive. But no, this is not about sneaking.
Or offensive?
Defensive in their positions. But look, this is not about sneaking something through. Proper notice has been given and it's been raised at the briefing. It's not political. It's a response to concerns in the community. And we're seeing that because we're getting the submissions to the amendment through. This is not putting more pressure on staff about the implementation. This is relieving the pressure because it's pushing out those timelines. This is not complicating the amendments. This is actually allowing the amendment to stand on its own 2 feet without it having to go through a very difficult, bulk restrictions right in the middle of the amendments consultation process. So, and I think, what's been raised about the MPs not understanding it goes directly to the point. More work needs to be done. Goes directly to the point, because if they don't understand it, our representatives, then how do you expect our community to understand it? So, look, I think what we really need to acknowledge here, that it is a complicated but ambitious implementation plan, perhaps too ambitious. And having heard the community, having heard businesses who require permits for their staff, having heard the views of thousands of people in our municipality who are not eligible for a permit, having heard so many people have concerns and question what is it going to mean for them, the right and proper thing will be to actually delay the implementation. I'm not questioning MITs. We've gone through there. We've done it. It's been adopted. What I'm saying is delay the implementation, explain it better to the community, allow the amendment to go through without it being complicated by this bulk restriction. And at the end of the day, you will get a better outcome.
Thank you, Councillor Tapanos. I'll put it to the vote. All those in favour? Against? Can I have that vote recorded, please? So all those in favour? Councillor Yildiz, Councillor Tapanos, Councillor Farnley and Councillor Carly Hannon. Against? Councillors Martin, Kavanagh, Abboud, Riley, Davidson and Bolton. I declare that lost. The crown, the jewel in the crown. Notice of motion 6019. I'm not reading it, you can read it.
I don't think it needs to be read.
Don't read it then.
Okay, I rise, councillors, to move an alternative of what's in the agenda.
Policy on the run.
Oh, no.
and that is, and I'll read it for you. That council officers investigate and prepare a report to council on the initiatives to increase awareness and inform owners of their responsibility to clean up after their pets, such as placing more signs in public places.
Did you have a second?
I'm Councillor Yildiz, that's
Sorry.
Councillor Tuppence.
No, I was laughing at him because he got a second.
As listed.
Okay, talk to it, Councillor.
Okay, thank you. And I'll try. I do believe with an increasing population that we are getting more and more pressure on our parks and particularly our sporting grounds. And there is a problem, and there's always been a problem. It's been an age-old problem, but an increasing one of dog droppings in our parks. This council has a very strong local law and has taken a very strong approach towards it, and by making it very clear that owners are responsible to clean up after their pets. Still has a long way to go. I think it should be providing more plastic bags to owners to be able to do that. But council, whilst we've been implementing a local law, we haven't fined one single person, not one infringement. So is the local law working if not one infringement has been issued? The previous motion that did get a lot of media was an innovative approach which was raised by residents. I acknowledge that it was probably a little bit too visionary considering there wasn't an operator in Australia, but I'm glad that it was able to get some publicity, and I'm glad that those issues were raised because if it means that residents are taking this issue more serious and taking their responsibilities more serious, that is surely a good thing. So in moving this today, I acknowledge that the innovative approach of DNA testing is not necessarily feasible. It certainly doesn't have the support of my colleagues here, and that's been made clear over the debate that's been had in the media and so forth. So I'm trying to get a motion up that does have support, that could at least raise the awareness in the community so we can start dealing with what is a serious issue. And what the community and sporting clubs have told us is a serious issue, what we have a local law about, but we have failed to find any individual. So I'm hoping that we could get some positive outcomes from officers in this report, and we can put some more signage and actually run a good positive awareness campaign that is going to promote responsible dog ownership and support dog owners in fulfilling their duties under our local law.
Thank you, Councillor Tapanos. Councillor Yildiz.
I mean, your original motion was definitely far-fetched, excuse the pun, Councillor Tapanos, but this is more reasonable.
That wasn't a pun, just
$53.90 is what we collect per dog registration, and $4.10 of that goes to the state government. Playing golf on Sunday up in Mandalay, there were a number of these things. And I took a photo of this, remember?
Oh, no, please.
A number of these things.
Oh, the signs, oh, thank goodness.
It's not dog food, Councillor. No, it's actually...
Exhibit A.
Keep it together, councillors.
Sorry, AMS products had a number of these scattered all over the golf course. It's obviously a private golf course, and being a member there, I noticed a lot of these scattered all over the place. Pick up after your dog poo, do the right thing. They had, in fact, they had a replacement lot of bags next to these stations. So, I mean, here we are collecting this money. 11,000 dogs in the municipality, 20 to 30% or 30 to 40% dog owners aren't registering their dogs. But I think it's only fair that part of the animal management process is that we invest some money into this. There was argument a few years ago, I can't remember Councillor Kavanagh or Councillor Davidson, those of you that were quite passionate about this. I can't remember why we didn't, in fact, roll these out more in the city, but your point's very valid, Councillor Tapanos. I don't think there's enough exposure and enough marketing done out there by us to ensure that owners are responsible after their dogs. And I think we need to also emphasise and perhaps do a campaign, Joe, around encouraging people to, in fact, register their dogs. Because as I mentioned on radio, they're pooping on ratepayers by, excuse the pun, by not registering their dogs, and we know how many other issues there are in terms of dangerous dogs and a whole range of other issues. But I really do appreciate you bringing this forward and amending the original motion, which really wasn't, I don't think, realistic. But I'm happy to support you on this one.
I'll speak next.
Against or support?
Well, you're right, it is a problem. And what we do as councillors is residents in the city, ratepayers and renters as well, come to us with problems as councillors, and we deal with those problems if we can, where we can. So I do agree that it's a problem. But if there's a long list of problems, I don't feel like this is at the top of the list of problems. It's not that I don't care about people not taking responsibility for pet ownership and also the threat of other people stepping in faeces. We've all done it. It's just that it doesn't feel like a priority for me. It doesn't feel like something that I think that we need to put a lot of energy and money into. So although I acknowledge it is a problem, I don't think it's a problem that needs a great priority right now. Contrary to what Councillor Tapanos says, and even though I am the mayor and it is my role, I haven't spoken to the media. I haven't been asked to speak to the media, and I didn't see a reason to. So I don't think Councillor Tapanos could have any idea whatsoever how I feel about the threat of people stepping in faeces and the issue of irresponsible dog ownership. But I think that I won't support the motion. Councillors in support of? Councillor Kavanagh?
I'd like to speak in support of the motion. I do think that it's a fair and reasonable motion. But I do want to say that I think the problem is being a little bit overstated. My general observations, and I must admit it's only anecdotal, I think that the vast majority of dog owners are responsible. I see, I'm not saying there's not some problem, but I don't think we should overemphasise and pretend that the vast majority of our dog owners are acting irresponsibly, because I believe they are acting responsibly. And that's from a person who walks his dogs almost every day. So, and acts responsibly, I'm pleased to say. But I will say that I just agree with Councillor Tapanos. I don't think the publicity in the last week has been positive. I think the publicity in the last week has shown this council can make really, put up some really ridiculous decisions. Now, this wasn't a decision of council, but that wasn't reported properly. It sounded like in the media as if this had been a council decision, and it's really frustrating. As one of the councillors on this council, we all get tired with that, and I think it was a silly thing to put up, and I think it actually reflects badly on council. And unfortunately, there's been a number of other things too that have done as well. So I think it's actually been not a very positive experience. But as far as the motion that's been put up tonight, I support it.
Thank you, Councillor Kavanagh. Any other councillors like to speak? How about I put it to the vote? All those in favour? Oh, sure, please do.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you. No, I do note particularly the comments of Councillor Kavanagh, and by no means do I suggest that a lot of dog owners are irresponsible. They're not. They're very responsible. It is a small minority, a very small minority that is causing the problem, but it is a repeated problem, and it is still a problem, particularly for our sporting pitches. And I do know that there is a lot of bacteria and E. coli that goes into our river systems, and I know that people from our creeks also talk about the impact it has when it runs off into our waterways. So I do think more awareness is important, and I do want to say that the original motion was an innovative idea, right? But it is something that is in operation in the United States. It is something that's in operation in London. It's something that Madrid is looking at the moment. So it is happening right across the world. And sometimes we need to not necessarily just look at how we shut down an idea, but look at how we can enable it to happen. So if costs are a barrier, how can we eliminate those? How do we actually embrace innovation in this council, not just shut it down? So I think there was a lot of misinformation that was in the media, particularly around costs, and I think that's been corrected. But at the end of the day, I do acknowledge that it was an innovative motion that we're not ready for at the moment, and an awareness campaign is a good first step.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Tapanos. I'll put it to the vote. All those in favour? Against? 1, 2, 3, 4.
Councillor
Lost.
Councillor Bolton didn't vote.
No, support.
Abstained. She's abstained. Sorry, it was passed. It was passed.
Yeah.
It's not a competition. Not win or lose, Ali. It just was passed, that's all. Congratulations, Councillor Tapanos. What a week we've had. Okay, that...
So much shit around that stuff. Sorry.
Councillors, that concludes our notices of motion. I'll now move to notices of rescission. And as we have none, I'd like to move on to foreshadowed items, and I believe Councillor Riley has a foreshadowed item. Yeah? Would you like to give us a brief outline about the item, please?
Oh, yeah, there's in terms of our Moreland Affordable Housing Limited, there's some, lack of developments happening there, and I'm concerned about the timelines and the impact on our council plan and our outcomes. And even though there is a report coming to the next council, but in terms of our ability to influence who's on that board, I think the level of the lack of progress, the lack of leadership and so on means that I'm going to be likely to put up a notice of motion around exercising our right to have a councillor representative on the board, just to get it back to work, for one, and to make sure that we've got some, looking at all the options before us in terms of the work we need to do in affordable housing, because it's a big piece of work.
Thank you, Councillor Riley. I'll now move to urgent business. So for members of the gallery and those watching at home, an urgent business item is an item that has arisen since the distribution of the agenda and which cannot be deferred until the next meeting. Councillors, do we have any urgent business items to propose? Nope. So as we have no urgent business this evening, I'd now move...
Can I just make a note, please? I acknowledge that it's your last meeting.
Oh, yes.
The Mayor tonight, isn't it?
I'll come back to the next meeting, but not in this chair.
Yeah, I think. Look, I think it's only fair that we acknowledge that it is your last meeting.
Thank you.
No doubt, there's been things that we've debated in this chamber, things we haven't agreed on, but I think you've done a pretty good job as Mayor this year.
Pretty good, thanks.
And I think we, as councillors, need to acknowledge that, and I want to congratulate you. Haven't agreed on a lot of things with you, but...
I don't even agree I'm pretty good. I think I've done a spectacular job. Just saying.
You're very animated. You're very passionate about the things that matter to the community as well, and obviously to. Well, I don't want to go into detail, but I just want to acknowledge, and I think it's only fair that we do this, and a councillor should do it. So, well done to a great year of sharing.
Thank you so much. So I now need a motion to close the council meeting to the public in accordance with section 89(2) of the Local Government Act, because we need to move into confidential business. Do I have a mover to close the meeting? Oh, Councillor Kavanagh and Councillor Riley to second. Martin, sorry. My other friend on council. I now declare the council meeting closed to the public at 9:30.
I don't think we voted to close it.
Oh, sorry, we'll vote on that. All those in favour of closing the meeting to the public? Against? Declare that carried. Now I'll declare the meeting closed to the public at 9:30. And I'd like to thank the gallery attendees.